In this video, I'm going to go over what's new in the CSM 631 release. So the 631 release comes out in the fourth quarter, towards the end of November, and these are the new features. So as you can see, we've been pretty busy since our last release, which is the 630 release. We've got a number of new work items, so without further ado, let me start going through them. All right, the first one I want to talk about is a rename of how we display Spectrum Virtualize devices. So this is for any systems such as your flash systems, your 9200, etc., that use Spectrum Virtualize underneath it to manage replication. If we discover a Spectrum Virtualize system when you do the add storage connection, we will now, well, in the past we used to name it with the name of the system. So if it was a flash system 9200, we'd say flash system 9200 :cluster name of the system. Well, this became a little bit difficult when new systems, new hardware, new flash systems, etc., started being introduced. Every time that happened, CSM would have to modify its code to ensure that we could support the new system and display it correctly. So what we've done in this release is we've made it so that the ID is more constant. So if it's a Spectrum Virtualized system, whether it be a flash system 9200 or flash system 5200 type devices, 5100 type devices, we will now display Spectrum Virtualize in the name. So we'll say Spectrum Virtualize :cluster name. So that would be consistent across the board. If you want to know what the model is, if you go to the Storage Systems panel, is in that picture at the top, we will display in the type column the model if we discover it through our query. So in this case, we discovered an IBM flash system 7200 system, but you'll see in the Storage System column it is labeled as a Spectrum Virtualize. I will note that if you do have a system and it's already attached and you upgrade to the 631 version of CSM, we will automatically rename the system to use the Spectrum Virtualize name. So be sure that you know before you upgrade that that's going to happen so that you don't get confused. The system name should be the same, so in this case it's Fab3 Dev13, but the full ID that we display in CSM will be different. And along those lines, we've also simplified, because of this, we simplified the add storage system wizard in general. So for those who have used CSM for a while, you'll know that the add storage system wizard had a lot of options there. DS8000, it still included DS8000, I believe it had the other labels for other systems, some older systems that are no longer supported through normal IBM support site. And so we simplified it to the three main storage systems we manage, which would be a DS8000 system, the flash system Spectrum Virtualize systems, so that includes all the flash system 9200, 7200, all the Spectrum Virtualize based systems, and the flash system Spectrum Accelerate. So any of those A9000 systems that are still being supported with CSM, you can connect them with that flash system Spectrum Accelerate icon. And then last, if you have a ZOS attachment or you're running on Z, we do have the ZOS direct connection option there in the Add Storage System Wizard as well. So you should remember that if you are connecting and managing a DS8000 system through Z, go ahead and click on the ZOS direct connection and select the storage systems you want to manage through CSM. This just helps us because a ZOS connection, whether it be IP or actual CSM installed on the ZOS, that Z system might be connected to multiple DS8000s, and some of which you may not even be managing through CSM, and so you can select which ones you want to manage that way. So a lot of simplifications here in this work item. All right, the next work item I want to talk about that we added was the ability to allow a recover for safeguarded copy sessions more programmatically. So today you can do a programmatic recover backup command to a safeguarded copy session. That's both for DS8000 safeguarded copy as well as Spectrum Virtualize safeguarded copy. However, you have to specify a backup ID. So programmatically, you would have to go look up all the backups for a session, choose the backup you want, and then do a recover off that backup. You may be doing that already. You might just be looping through all the backups and doing recover to test them. However, we believe there's cases where you may, as part of your actual backup process, want to validate the backup, and so you would want to do the backup. The backup will be triggered maybe through an external script or maybe through a CSM scheduled task. And as part of that, you may want to kick off the actual validation, which means you would want to recover that backup to the recovery volumes. Because the backup ID gets created on the fly as you do a backup based off the time of the backup, that becomes difficult to do in, say, a scheduled task in CSM or automation. So this release, we are now allowing the recover backup command without specifying backup ID. So you can still specify a backup ID if you want to recover a specific backup, but if you choose not to specify a backup ID, we will find the last recoverable backup for either the DS8000 safeguarded copy or the Spectrum Virtualize safeguarded copy session and do the recover backup for that. So as you can see in the scheduled task there, you can do the backup and then do a recover. It's all part of that. You can set up a recover backup now in the scheduled task. Before, we didn't even show the recover backup command when you created a command action and pulled down the list of commands. Now you can do a recover backup. You just won't be specifying a backup ID in the scheduled task. It will just automatically grab the latest, the last recoverable backup. All right, so our next work item that we implemented for 631 has to do with our custom certificates. So for forever now, we supported custom certificates, but you basically had to modify the certificate file on the actual CSM server, which really is a more advanced kind of thing to do. So what we've implemented is the ability to add these your custom certificates to the trust store straight through our GUI. So if you go to the settings panel, under advanced tools, you can scroll all the way down, and there's now this import trust store section, which allows you to select the choose a trust store to import button, which will allow you to pull a file from your system that you're running the browser on. It can be a P12 or JKS file, and you can specify an optional password for that, and our code will automatically add that to the trust store. Now the key here is it's not going to, since you're already up and running, it's not going to take effect until the next time you start your CSM server. You don't expect it to happen right away, but if you want it to take effect right away, restart your CSM server. Now if you have any issues with that, we do, before we update the trust store, we do automatically take not only a backup of the CSM server itself, so that's the auto backup files that you'll find for our backups, server backups, but we will also create, there's a backup trust store that gets created as well as part of this. So you should be able to revert things back in the event that whatever P12 or JKS file you import has an issue that causes you to be unable to access the CSM server. On that note, you do need access to the actual we don't allow this to work on HMCs. So if your CSM DS8000 is running on a DS8000 HMC, you cannot import any files on the HMC for security reasons, and thus you should be using the mechanism through the DS GUI to allow you to update your trust stores. That's all handled through the port forwarding of the DS8000 HMC. All right, the next work I'm going to talk about is the restore backup command change. And what this is for safeguarded copy sessions. In the past, the restore backup command was just labeled restore backup. Well, this caused a little bit of concern because the recover one is called recover backup. So recover backup was next to restore backup in the drop down for session actions, which there was concern that you might accidentally select one versus the other. So just to review, the recover backup command takes the backup and recovers that backup to a set of recovery volumes. So this is not your production volumes, but a different set of volumes that you can use to do your testing or forensics, etc. The restore backup, though, would take that backup and automatically apply it back to the production volumes. So for the 6.3.1 release, in order to mitigate that concern a little bit, we renamed the restore backup command to restore backup to production. So this is a longer name, but it adds in the production keyword there, so that as not only is it a longer and gives it some difference in the dropdown, but because it has production in the command name itself, hopefully that gives a little extra warning before someone accidentally clicks it, or before they click it on purpose, so they know what they're doing. In addition, when the pop-up for the restore backup to production command is issued, we now have a bright yellow box that appears around the warning message, as well as some red text that indicates they're about to overwrite your production data. So this is just extra validation so that you're extra protected before you go and restore backups to the production volumes. All right, the next work I'm talking about is the support for restore to production to remote copy secondary volumes. This is the restore feature for the DS8000. In the 9.2 release, we allow you to restore to production to the original PPRC primary volume, remote copy primary volume. So if you have a Metro Mirror relationship or Global Mirror relationship going from H1 to H2, and you're taking safeguarded copy backups off of H2, the 9.2 release and the CSM 6.3.0 release allows you to restore from a backup back to the original H1 volume without the need for a full copy. So after we released, there was some customers that indicated that they actually take their safeguarded copy backups off the source volume in that situation. So again, you have an H1, H2 remote copy relationship, either Metro Mirror or Global Mirror, but they're taking the backups, safeguarded copy backups off of the H1 volumes. So as in the picture there shows, in this case, they still want to do a restore to production. However, what it's going to do is restore to the remote copy target volumes instead. So this will now work starting with CSM 6.3.1 and the 9.2.1 release of DS8000. You'll restore to that H2 volume instead. But obviously that's not your production volumes, so you'll need to reverse the direction of the remote copy relationship and start copying H2 back to H1, and then in order to get that restored data from the backup back to your H1 production volumes. So this is what I have here is a set of steps to demonstrate what you would do in the straight Metro Mirror session. But the Global Mirror session is supported too. It has a different set of steps because you got to make sure that you do the recover to Global Mirror before you actually do the restore to the backup. But it's essentially the same, and we also support the multi-target sessions as well. So the Red Book will be updated to reflect this new set of configurations that are supported. But this is just to let you know an example of how to do it in the Metro Mirror environment. All right, the next one I want to talk about is support for AIX 7.3. For those that are familiar with AIX, we should know that there's a new 7.3 release coming out in the fourth quarter here of 2021. And CSM will officially be able to install on the AIX 7.3 servers. So if you bring up the CSM installer, it should work just fine, no warnings, no errors, and you'll be able to install CSM to run on AIX 7.3. All right, the next work item is another request for enhancement that we had for being able to clear the reserves on DS8000 FlashCopy relationships. So the scenario was actually for a Global Mirror with practice session. They would flash do their practicing, etc. And then on the next flash, they were hitting errors indicating that there were reserves on the FlashCopy targets. Unfortunately, since CSM didn't have the ability to remove that reservation, they would have to go to DSCSI and clean it up, or DSGUI directly. So what this release does is it adds a new option in the FlashCopy options for both the FlashCopy session as well as all the practice sessions for CSM that would do flashes. And it is the reset target reserves for fixed block volumes option. So you would set, if you check that on the session, on the next flash, we will set the bit that will reset that reserve to allow that flash to occur. So just be careful with it, obviously. In the event that the reserve is there for a reason, this will blow through that reserve and allow it the establish to work. But this does allow you to, through CSM, prevent the errors that you would hit and clear those errors by setting that option. All right, the next one is a RFE based off of the scheduled tasks. This is to be able to check the basically the global mirror data exposure, or the RPO, for a given DS8000 Global Mirror role pair. And the reason for this is there are cases such, maybe there's an issue with the Global Mirror that is causing your data exposure, or RPO, to be quite high. Such that the DS8000 isn't forming the consistency groups like you would want it to. Now, I should note that CSM does have warnings for that, so you can set threshold, warning, and severe thresholds on the session itself, so you can be alerted to that effect. But if you have a scheduled task running, you may forget to disable it if you got that warning, or you may forget that it runs automatically, or the timing may just run before you even deal with the alert that you got. And so if that scheduled task does something like a suspend, which is a pause to the global mirror with consistency, what may happen is things may get stuck even longer, because that pause with consistency will not be able to complete until a consistency group is formed. But because you're having issues, that consistency group doesn't get formed, and you're just stuck. And so what this does is it allows you to add an action before the suspend, a new type called validate data exposure. You select the session and the role pair, and then specify what data exposure time you would like to see before allowing the action to continue. So once we start running this action, the example shows 40 seconds here, so I'll use that as the example. If your data exposure is less than 40 seconds, the action will complete and allow you to go to the next action in the scheduled task. If, however, the data exposure is above that, say it's at 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever, that action will requery and check it again, but it will prevent it from going to the next action until the timeout value is specified there. So in this case, the timeout's 10 minutes. So we will keep checking for the data exposure to be less than 40 seconds for up to 10 minutes. If at the point of it gets to 10 minutes and the data exposure has not gone back below 40 seconds, the action itself will fail, which will fail the scheduled task itself. So the scheduled task will not continue on. This helps prevent the suspension from causing any further issues until you are able to diagnose why the data exposure is higher than expected. Obviously, if a scheduled task fails, you will get alerted based off the SNMP or email alerts that we provide. All right, the next one is another RFE, which is wanting the ability to support user-defined consistency group names in multi-target Metro Mirror, as well as the Metro Mirror multi-target foresight session. So when we introduced the ability to provide user-defined consistency group names for Metro Mirror, we did leave out these multi-target MM session types. Just to rehash, the reason why you specify user-defined consistency group name typically for Metro Mirror role pairs is because that is the username that we use when we send a hyperswap or hardened freeze configuration to the iOS component on ZOS. We use that name, and then that allows you to set up multiple CSM sessions that use that same name, so that you can, in the same ZOS system, you can have multiple sessions that, one may be a 3-site session, one might be a 2-site session, but all the metro mirror relationships of those would be under the same hyperswap configuration on ZOS. So that's why we provided the user-defined consistency group name. However, with multi-target MM sessions, we didn't support it right off the bat because of the way we have in the particular case, the ZOS iOS configuration can have 2 different role pairs at the same time enabled for hyperswap or hardened freeze, and so we had a special naming convention on how we built that and sent it to the iOS team. Now, so with this release, the concern was from why the RFE was raised was because their naming convention in the session, which is what the session name is what we use for multi-target MMM sessions to send to iOS. But if their naming convention causes the name to be greater than 12 characters, there's a limit to what we can send, the name that we can send to iOS. If it's too long, we concatenate it, add a value so that if it matches another session that concatenates to the exact same value, we add an additional 1, 2, 3 value to it to make it unique. Thus, we have an algorithm essentially that allows it to create a unique name. But what was happening is after an IPL, we would rebuild these names, but the order that we started up the sessions made a big difference. So if in one of the sessions, session 1 in the first case, resolved to the name that has _01, in the second session resolved to a name with _02, and otherwise those names are the same, then on the IPL, it was a case where session 2 might resolve to the 01 name and session 1 resolve to the 02 name. And that caused conflicts and problems. And so what this solution now does, now that we support user-defined consistency group names, they can keep their session naming convention, so it's just as long as it was before, but they can specify a shorter, under 12-character name that the multi-target MMM relationships and the 4-site session relationships will use to send to iOS in order to build those hardened freeze or hyperswap configurations. I should note that we do not allow these sessions to. It's not meant to handle the case of combining this session with another session to create a cross-session hyperswap solution. And the primary reason for that is when you have a multi-target MMM session with the 2 hyperswaps, that their iOS is already built to handle that configuration. They expect that with the particular MM pair that there will be a second relationship as well, second MM relationship. If you have another session out there that might not have the same topology, might be a single site or something like that, it kind of confuses things. So it's not meant for that, but it is meant to be able to allow you to have a specific name we send to iOS for these multi-target sessions to avoid any conflict in the name we send them. All right, so this next work item is another RFE, and it's similar to the last one as it deals with user-defined consistency group names. However, this is for DS8000 Global Mirror sessions. So we originally introduced user-defined consistency group names on Global Mirror role pairs for sessions in order to allow customers to define multiple Global Mirror sessions on a given DS8000 system, so that they can manage the Global Mirror sessions separately without, even though there may be more Global Mirror sessions managed in CSM than they allow on the DS8000. So in other words, there's a limit to the number of Global Mirror sessions you can have on DS8000. A lot of customers, though, wanted to create more sessions than that because maybe they have a VMware environment where each volume or a small set of volumes are in an individual session where some may fail over while others don't. In that case, they still needed to create that many GM sessions that they can manage and suspend and recover separately. And so CSM allows them to do that by defining this consistency group name that will share the master session ID on the hardware across multiple sessions. Now, that support's been in a while, but what this request is that today, when you do a suspension, because it's designed to allow you to manage the session separately, it will suspend the session that you issue the command to. Obviously, because they share the same master, it pauses all the sessions. But what we'll do is we'll pull that session you suspended out of the master session ID, and then we'll restart the master so that all the other sessions that were sharing it get restarted and start forming consistency groups. Well, in this particular case, they wanted the ability to do the suspension without the restart. So they wanted all the sessions that shared the same session ID, the same user-defined consistency group, to suspend and stay suspended, thus suspending consistently. So to do this, we added a property. We figured this was kind of the best way to do it for now. It's kind of confusing to have the two different ways. And so we added this property, the CSM server, suspend all shared GM sessions property that you can set in server properties. That will now allow it will tell the suspend command not to restart the master so that all the sessions suspend. So you only have to issue a suspend to one of the sessions, but all the sessions that share that same user-defined consistency group name will stay suspended. You'll have to restart them individually after that to get things going again. All right, next work item is another RFE for being able to programmatically create not only server backups, but log packages and do the download. So today we do allow you to programmatically do a server backup or create a log package, but there's no way to offload it. So what this does is it's a new both REST and DSCLI commands that add an option that will not only build the backup or package, but will do the download as well. So for REST, you'll see that there's the new the backup server -download, or the log package is synchronous -download. And I should remind you that these are synchronous commands because of the download piece. So you'll have to wait. The command may take a while as we do the backup of the download, backup or the log package creation, and then the download time it takes before the actual command completes. And then in the CSM CLI, there's now a -dir option on both of those make backup and make log package commands, where you can specify the directory of the server the CSM CLI is running on to download and store the log package or server backup. And the main reason why you would want to do this is maybe you want to set up an external job or cron job that does a backup of the CSM server, offloads it and stores it for audit reasons. Or you may have, maybe for the log package piece, maybe as part of your ticket system, you can automatically create it, download it, send it, and store it for customers. So there's multiple reasons why you might want to do this, but we now allow you to programmatically do it through the REST or the CLI. All right, and our last one here that I'm going to talk about is our new automation user role. So this has to do with automation like the last one, but we had a request where they wanted a special user role particularly for automation. So if they're building external scripts and calling us through REST, etc., one of the issues is if you enable dual control, it made it difficult because dual control indicates that a second user has to approve the request before it's allowed to run. So with automation, typically you don't have that kind of situations. It makes it a little more difficult that automation then has to automate the approval of the request, and that's tough. So what they wanted was this new automation user role will bypass all dual control. So if you have dual control on the server, that automation user will not require a second user to approve the command before running. So be very aware of that before you use it, but that's the primary reason they wanted and added the request. Another reason is just for audit logging purposes. So you might want a specific user that's only set for audit logging, such that for automation, such that when you look at the logs, you can tell, hey, this was the automation user that ran it, so this was part of the automation code, versus someone coming in with that same user, in the past, like a user admin or something, and running it through the GUI or manually through the CLI. So both for audit reasons and to bypass dual control, we have this new automation user. So what can the automation user do? Well, it's essentially like an admin user in terms of the sessions. So it can manage all the sessions. That means create copy sets, remove copy sets, run commands, etc. But it can't manage users and other aspects of the server itself. It's kind of along the lines of all the things you probably want to automate, but try to secure it by not allowing them to automate any user controls. With that said, when you define the automation user, you can also make it so the automation user can use the REST API by default, no matter what. However, you can limit its access to the GUI and CLI. So as you can see in the picture, if you check the allow CLI access, allow GUI access, then that particular automation user could be used by either those, one or the other, or both. However, if you don't check it, then it can only be used by the REST API. You can't have a GUI login, can't have a CLI login, thus hopefully securing it a little bit more if you plan for that user to only be done through the script in your automation. Now, as an additional thing to add security, we do have the ability to also check a box that says only run scheduled tasks. So I mentioned earlier that the automation user can manage all the sessions and do all the add copy sets, remove copy sets, etc. Well, if your automation that you're setting up doesn't, it's not like one of these kind of cloud environments where you're provisioning and setting up replication and tearing and things down and building things up, then you may be just doing automation that runs a scheduled task. So a scheduled task itself has a bunch of automated steps. You have multiple actions that can run across multiple sessions, but maybe you don't want to use the built-in scheduler. Maybe that particular scheduled task needs to be kicked off from a batch job on mainframe or something like that. And so what this does is it allows you to specify that automation user, select only run scheduled tasks, and at that point, all that user can do is issue the run for the scheduled task, run at time or the run immediately. It can do both, and it will execute that scheduled task that you specify. And I should say that if you select that, you cannot have the GUI access is disabled by default. You can't recheck GUI access. So only run scheduled task doesn't even let you touch the GUI. You can get into CLI, so you can check CLI access if you want. However, you'll still be limited to what commands you can do. You can only really run the scheduled tasks through the CLI if you do that. So that helps limit what they can do, limit the any holes that you might feel for that particular automation user being able to run against the CSM server. So be careful with this user, obviously, but at the same time, hopefully it makes some of your lives easier by having this automation user for audit and bypass dual control situations. All right, with that said, here's the normal links I put out there. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you like the features in 6.3.1. It's very heavy with RFEs, as I pointed out earlier, and you can see from all the different charts. So we're listening to all your requests. It's my typical pitch at the end of these videos. Listen to your requests, and we're implementing them as soon as we can. So thank you very much, and enjoy the 6.3.1 CSM release.